All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance Conversation Series focusing on organ transportation and logistical challenges. We're very excited to host quite an esteemed panel for an insightful discussion today on the critical challenges and effective practices that affect our field. My name's Corey Bryant. I serve as Senior Director of Communications here at the Alliance, and I'm privileged to welcome you this afternoon. We also want to give you an early save the date for next year. We know that organ transportation and logistics is going to be a major ongoing discussion in the near future. And on September 13th, 2023, the Alliance will be hosting a one-day National Critical Issues Forum solely dedicated to organ transportation and logistics. And that's going to be hosted in partnership with the Midwest Transplant Network in Kansas City and will be hosted at their facility in Kansas City. That information will be on our website and communications soon, so stay tuned for registration information on that to come. We'd also like to thank the sponsor for today's program, Million Air. Headquartered in Houston, Million Air is an award-winning network of executive FBO terminals spanning 3 continents. Million Air has been named Best Large FBO Chain for the past 8 years, delivering genuine care and exceptional service to aircraft owners, pilots, and their distinguished guests. Striving to make their customers feel at home, they have taken every consideration into account to make sure all amenities reflect the unparalleled experience customers have come to expect. For more information, visit millionaire.com. And now, before we get started, you'll notice that your lines have been muted upon logging in for today's program. So please take special care to ensure your lines do stay muted so as not to distract from our program until the Q&A discussion period. But if you have comments, questions, or feedback to share, please pop them in the chat box. But remember to select everyone in the to field so that your colleagues are able to see your feedback. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Kevin Lee. Kevin currently serves as Executive Vice President and Chief Operations Officer, as well as incoming Chief Executive Officer of Mid-America Transplant in St. Louis, Missouri. Kevin, it's always a pleasure to have you with us, and I'll turn it over to you to kick off today's conversation.
Great, Corey. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone. We have over 200 registrants from across the country that are participating. We want to make sure this is interactive as possible. So again, Corey has mentioned on how to participate in the chat, and please do post your questions there as well. And then Deanna from the Alliance will also be launching a poll in several minutes, and we would encourage you to participate in that poll. So the format this afternoon, we've invited each one of our esteemed panelists to share some of the challenges that they're facing and some potential solutions as they deal with transportation and logistical issues on an ongoing basis. And then after that, we will have an open period for questions as well. And we'll be taking those questions from the chat or from the poll, as I just mentioned, excuse me. So we will be starting on the West Coast with our panelists from California, moving through to the Midwest with Lori Markham, going up to New England, and then finishing off with Kevin down at Piedmont, just so you're aware of the flow of this afternoon's conversation. But just to set the context for that and what unites us all together, whether we represent an OPO or a transplant center or a vendor, is really a common commitment to serve the public's best interests. Because ultimately together, as an entity, as an industry, as an ecosystem, we are public servants really working for the public good. And within that, we hold a common value, and that value is stewardship. We work each and every day. Our teams are relentless in their efforts to steward the gifts that have been so generously given by donors and their families. And it's really that commitment to ensuring that we steward that gift to its new home that drives today's panel as we look to address the logistical and transportation challenges that we all universally face, regardless of whether we're in a major population center or a smaller community as well. How do we get these gifts to their intended destination in a timely fashion so that we can honor them? So with that, we are going to begin with Valerie from Donor Network West. And so Valerie, I'd invite you to unmute yourself and share a little bit about the challenges that you and your team are facing there in Northern California.
Definitely. And thank you for giving the opportunity for all of us to get together and talk about such an important topic. I know that it affects all of us. So When we kind of discussed about how we are going to do this, I represent an OPO in Northern California that has a large service area, as well as Eastern Nevada, part of Reno. So we'll start with some of the challenges that we've seen here. And I know that we have abdominal that we're going to focus on for us, and then we'll move to thoracics. So a couple of different things that we've seen. I think a lot of people throughout the United States, especially with the pandemic, we've really noticed that there is an increase in local procurement being asked for abdominal organs. And that, of course, has its own challenges, as well as just moving people around. During the pandemic, there was a big decrease in flights, as well as change of cargo hold hours, a decrease in drivers for those that need to drive, and just some differences that we had. So a couple of examples that we've had that we've then reacted to and tried to change. One of the more difficult logistic challenge that I actually had with one of our teams is that we had a kidney that had 100% match. It was a flight that was going to be out of the Bay Area, and the courier service that we use needed to, of course, go to the airline. And for those of you who aren't aware, there is a lockout of 1 hour to get a kidney on the flight, as well as the paperwork needs to be done so that it's TSA cleared, gets lifeguard status, and the organ gets on the plane. And in this instance, they were working on getting that paperwork cleared in the background, and the driver was standing and ready to hand off the kidney. They finally got that clearance, they got everything done, and the driver in this case went to hand off the kidney to the airline, and they told him, "You're 4 minutes late. You're 4 minutes past lockout." And that kidney did not get on that plane because it was 4 minutes from that lockout. And unfortunately, that then made the kidney go out the next morning. And the kidney had an extended amount of cold time, and with a very highly sensitized patient. That's an example of some of the challenges that we have to work through. And on the other end, we had an instance where we had a liver coming in, and there was a driver shortage in the Bay Area, and we didn't have that liver with an adequate driver that was able to get there and understood what the donation process is. And that liver took a lot longer than it should have to get to the hospital that was waiting for it. So what we've done with our courier services is we've actually changed our accounts to where we have 3 different accounts and have a different standard operating procedure with the different accounts. One's for research, one is for our pre-procurement operations, and the other is organ specific. And that way we have a different set of operating procedures and a different context that's much more close with the courier services than what our other organs are or processes. And of course, blood and instruments and all that are very important, but when you're carrying an organ, you want that to be looked at very differently. We also meet very closely. I work every other week. I speak with our main courier service to talk about different instances. And we also have our options to where we have an in-house driver service. We've got our own logistics that we try to utilize, as well as other options that are available should there be some kind of shortage. So those are some of the examples that we've had with just our normal transportation. Some of the other challenges that we've had is just knowing what the capabilities are within transplant centers. As we move more and more to continuous distribution with UNOS, and we're having organs that are maybe not going towards our local transplant centers that we're most familiar with. We as OPOs are very used to partnering really closely with our local centers, work with them and have close relationships. So you know what the capabilities are, you get to know them very well. And so that's very good relationships that are developed. And as we move more towards the distribution process, where we're going to be working with other transplant centers, what we're finding as an OPO is that we need to reach out past our local centers so we know what the capabilities are. And I know that Megan's going to be following me. We did have an incident where, based on what our knowledge was, we were in a situation, one of the most common reasons families decline donation is because of time. So there are very frequently a big time constraint given on an OPO regarding the organs being donated. So we're put in a situation where the family is going to decline donation completely if we don't move forward on their time frame. And that has us in a situation of, do we go with all of the organs Do we do kidneys only? What can we do? Do we try for liver? Do we try for, the other organs that are available? And a lot of that is based on what we can and can't do and what those time constraints are. And we did have a situation where we had a big time constraint from a family. We were not able to move the OR. We weren't able to change things. And we actually had 2 declines back to back. One was from the primary center that was had accepted the liver, and they declined less than 4 hours to the OR. And so we had scrambled, and we'd already had a backup with one of our local centers, and they were in the OR, and there was a second decline after in the OR. So we had 2 declines at that point, which moved us to an expedited process so that we could place that liver. And that's what we've traditionally done. So we did follow that process. That's been our norm. And come to find out that during that process, we'd actually bypassed one of Megan's patients over at her center. And it drove a conversation that we realized that they, as sick as this patient was, would have authorized a transportation that we're not used to. So they would have actually been able to get there in time and take this organ, but that had not been something that we'd seen in the past. So what that helped us as an OPO realize is that we really need to know what the capabilities are of the transplant centers that we're giving our organ offers to. It takes so much time to go down the list and call and give those options if you are in those situations. But if you know what the capabilities are, you have those contacts, then you're much more able to kind of know what you need to do in that intense situation. So in this case, we've actually partnered a lot closer, and our goal is to work with all of the centers that we can to really understand what their capabilities are, what they're willing to do logistically, so that we don't get into that situation where we are going to lose an organ, but that we can make sure that it goes to the right patient in the list as much as we possibly can. So in that instance, we're definitely working and reaching out more and more. And I think all of our OPOs, as we do move towards continuous distribution, we're going to work more with the centers, and it is going to cause more logistical challenges, but it's also going to hopefully get the right patients transplanted as much as possible.
Great, thank you. Before we pass it to Megan, Valerie, one follow-up question. When you talked about the 3 different accounts for ground transport, that was research, pre-procurement, and then organ preservation. Was that the 3rd category? Yes. Are they with the same vendor, or had you had to move to 3 separate vendors?
No, they're with the same vendor. So we have the 3 accounts of the same vendor that we primarily use for ground transportation, and we work very closely with them. We also do have an internal logistics team, but much smaller, and of course isn't going to be able to service our entire service area. But those 3 accounts has really made it so that we can individualize what the needs are for the different things that we're shipping, and really prioritize if it's an organ.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Megan, we're going to kick it over to you.
Hi, thank you. And yeah, I want to thank the Alliance for having this important conversation. Definitely lots to discuss here. One area that we've really had to look at is the incredible growth that our transplant center, like many transplant centers, have seen over the last few years that have driven us to really have to have the conversation about how we're handling transport. Our center from 2018 to current has had a 42% increase in our liver volume, followed by a 68% increase in our heart volume. So with that, we are going out on a lot more procurements or having to get a lot more hearts and livers back to us. A few things that we've done to address this. One was we put into place a call team that handles all of our internal organ offers, case setups, and especially the transport. And we found with having dedicated professionals that really know our transport system in and out, that has helped. Then we've had to look at more vendors. So we went from having 1 dedicated vendor back in 2018 to having now 3 to 4 that we are utilizing on a rotational kind of basis based on what our needs are for different procurements. Then we also really worked closely with our surgeons for abdominal on local recovery. And that was something that we didn't really start doing until the pandemic kind of forced us to have to look at local recovery and really develop a partnership with doctors in different areas that are able to recover for us. With that, we really started looking at hot standby, which I'm sure many centers here utilize as well. and really talking to our doctors about positioning of planes. So we make that a very early conversation now with our team, where when we're accepting a liver and we're having someone else procure it, the conversation that we have with our attending surgeon is this one that we are as sure as we can be in transplant that we think we're going to be bringing this organ back and transplanting it? If so, then we will have the plane positioned and ready to go. If not, there's times that we don't have the plane positioned and ready to go because we're waiting for either visualization or an intra-op biopsy. That has really helped me to cut down on our cost of transport by not moving a plane until we get that okay, that we visualize the liver looks good. The other thing is with the delay sometimes in OR starting, that helps us as well with not moving planes, putting a car in place until we know that the OR has actually started on time or as close to on time as possible. And then really waiting, if we can, for that intra-op biopsy or visualization before we are authorizing an aircraft to move. So those are a few things that we've put into place. We've also put into place an expedited organ offer policy with our team, where if we do receive an expedited organ, we have a whole algorithm that we move through that includes calls to multiple transport companies to see who can get the organ to us the quickest. And by doing this, we're able to really get an organ to us as quick as possible, but also look at the options that we have out there. It used to be that we just kind of made one straight phone call, and then we went with that and would tell the OPO, okay, yeah, we can come, we can get this at this time, but now we're calling multiple transport companies. So it is a lot more ask on our team. That is what we felt is definitely the strain of having to put a lot more into setting up a transplant. It's not as straight cut as it used to be, as just calling, getting your transport set up, everything straight. There's now multiple calls about whether the plane is going to be moved or not. We work a lot with Nevada, Arizona, Northern California with our location here in Southern California. So there's times where there's a plane in Arizona and a donor in Nevada, and we may not authorize moving that plane from Arizona to Nevada until we've visualized that organ. And a lot of that is based on the conversations with our surgeons. So the big thing is having those crucial conversations and training our team that we need to really have these conversations up front before the OR rather than in the OR. And when, we're already out there. So that's one thing we've done. Then we've also just partnered very closely with our transport companies to get metrics. This was something that, I'll be honest, in 2018-19, we didn't really look at the metrics of our transport. We were just going out on recoveries, getting organs back. But now we're really partnering on looking at our metrics. And that's something that I look at on a monthly basis. How many times we fly out versus how many times we have an organ that comes into us. And I then look at what time did the organ get to us and what time did we actually start in the OR? Because oftentimes there is a little bit of a delay there, whether that's on our end with our patient not being ready, we're waiting for intra-op, dialysis, we're waiting for anesthesia. But I can then bring that back to my surgical team to say, we choppered, because we chopper quite a bit here in the Los Angeles area, this organ back to shave 20 minutes off, but then it sat at the front desk in the OR for 30 minutes because we weren't ready to go. And that cost in choppering it back versus driving it back from where we land is a substantial cost. So we're really using our metrics to help guide our decisions on what we're doing with transport. And then, like Valerie said, a lot of partnership with our OPOs, making sure that they know this is our process for expedited placement. This is the capabilities that we have to transport. It's obviously not foolproof, and we do run into issues. One of our recent issues was with transport of a kidney, and the kidney was a failure to unload from the plane. It missed its connecting flight because it did not get unloaded. And so by the time we found out, the kidney had been sent to a different state, and it was 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and it was for a 100% PRA patient. So at that point, we really had to work very closely with the OPO the kidney was coming from, where the kidney was ended up, which was in New Mexico. And then with our transport partners, we worked with 3 different transport agencies that day to figure out who could help us get this organ to us the quickest as possible, because it was 100% PRA with a negative cross match. And we were able to successfully get that kidney to us with enough, time to transplant it in. But it was definitely one of those situations where we had to stop and look at what was our process. Why did we not know that the kidney had a failure to deplane until it, 2 hours after that connecting flight? And we really worked with our partners on that. Thank you.
Great, Megan. Just a couple of follow-up questions before we go to Lori. When you talked about at the top of your comments about bringing a call team in, how big were those new headcount? Or, I mean, are you adding a significant amount of staff? And I recognize that staff size is relative for each individual organization, but how much have you had to grow your team to really accommodate these extra logistical challenges?
Sure. Yeah, we developed a brand new team in 2018, and we brought on 10 people in 2018 that handle call for all organs. So they are cross-trained and they cover every organ while they're on call. We've grown and we now have a call team that is 17 people total. And they do take call, like I said, for all organs, and have really been instrumental since 2018. We've had a 34% growth overall in transplants, and it has really helped our workflow and process to have a dedicated group that they work very much hand in hand with our OPO transport companies.
That's great. Thank you. And then one last question on the local recovery, who initiates those conversations? Who maintains those conversations regarding local recovery? Is that a face-to-face surgeon, or any additional detail you could provide on that?
So whenever we're accepting a liver, we use local recovery for livers. And whenever we're accepting a liver, our coordinator that is setting up the case and working with the surgeon will ask, do we want local recovery, or are we sending out a team? Our surgeon then makes the decision based on a variety of factors, including how many livers we have going, if we have a team available to send. And really, we do look at the quality of the organ. If we think we're going to be potentially, it's going to be one that the intra-op biopsy isn't going to be great, and we've let them know that we're not 100% sure on this one, we often will utilize local recovery for that. So then our coordinator will be in touch with the OPO. We'll find out who is going to be doing the local recovery, and our coordinator helps initiate that discussion between the surgeon and the recovering surgeon.
Okay, great. And before I let you go, Megan, we do have a question in the chat from Deborah Campbell. Does your call team cover other calls too, such as post-transplant, or just procurement call?
They do all of the post calls, after hours, holidays, and weekends for all organs, urgent listings of patients, MELD updates, and they handle all inpatient transfers for liver, for urgent workups and evals 24/7.
Okay. And then Ronald is asking, does your call team work from home, or are they there in the office at the center?
They're 100% remote. They come in for training as needed, but they work 100% remote from home.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Megan, you've just,
all these questions.
They're popping now. We've got the chat is hopping at this point. Does your team use kidney pump and liver pump? That's from Jefferson.
So for kidney, we do pump if we're able to. So I would say we're not a robust pumping, but it depends. Oftentimes, an OPO will offer to send it on pump if there's going to be some extra cold time, and we'll take that. We do not use any preservation method for liver right now, any pump.
Okay. And then before going to Lori, last question for you, Megan, is how many staff are working on a given day in that? I guess, Lily, is that question the call center? How many staff are working in the call center each day?
I would guess that's what it is. So what we do for that, we have 12-hour shifts, and we have the majority are nurses, and then we have 5 what we call donor allocation specialists. Those are non-nurses that are supervised by the RN, and they are the ones that set up a lot of the transport and do a lot of the logistical issues, a lot of the paperwork issues, and also run offers by the surgeons. We have 1 RN on for day shift with a DAS. We have 1 RN on for night shift with the DAS. We have a swing shift that comes on to handle all of the post calls, meld updates, kind of all of the in between, and also then is available if there is a sick call or somebody needs to be pulled off call. And then we have somebody that covers transfers as well.
Great.
So we have about 6 people scheduled today.
Wow. All right. Thank you very much, Megan. Appreciate that. Lori Markham, we are going to swing it to the Midwest to Kansas City, home of the Kansas City Chiefs.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So as Kevin mentioned, I'm from Midwest Transplant Network. We're located right in the middle of the country, which you would think would be a good thing when it comes to logistics and transport and travel. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story. We cover the entire state of Kansas and the western 2/3 of Missouri. We recover approximately 375 organ donors a year that result in about 950 to 1,000 organ transplants. We have 5 transplant centers. 4 of them are adult centers. 1 is a pediatric center. Those centers include heart, liver, pancreas, and kidney programs. We don't have a lung program in our service area, so we've always had to be creative and work with outside lung programs and have been very successful, and we're very proud of our lung recovery outcomes. I want to go back to 2017 just for a second to set the stage. This was prior to the beginning of all of the allocation changes that we have all felt over the last few years. 60% of our total organs remained in our community at our local programs. In addition, we were a very low importing area. In 2017, we only brought in 22 total organs between our 5 programs. So very low in that regard. Our donor volume here was clearly meeting the needs of our transplant programs. When you fast forward to today, now that broader sharing has hit all the organ systems, only 26% of our organs remain local. And just this year, up until this point, we've brought in 206 total organs. That's an 836% increase in the number of import organs. So you can only imagine, as the ladies before me, the shift in workload and resources and just trying to stay up with that big change from our transplant programs and from our perspective as well. Today, it's rare that we have a local heart or liver team in the OR, and it's by far the norm that all the teams coming in for one donor are from outside our service area. There is hardly one case where there are not delays after an OR is agreed upon, or delays in even getting to set an OR time due to the lack of available transportation, primarily obviously for heart, lung, and liver programs. We currently make transportation arrangements for all of our centers when they have accepted an organ from outside of our area, and we send a staff member with their team to assist with the activities in the operating room. As you can imagine, in 2017, when we're dealing with 22 of those cases, that was very, very manageable, and we can handle that. When you increase that to 206, that definitely changes our operations. Obviously, because of the severe pilot shortage in the US during and following the pandemic, we're all feeling the pains of the ability to find a charter plane quickly. That is also financially reasonable, and it's just becoming increasingly difficult. Charters are obviously the primary source for the movement of hearts, lungs, and livers. However, the situation has become just as difficult for the commercial side of things, which is primarily used for the transportation of kidneys. And again, this is largely due to the immense pilot shortage in our country. Recently, I want to tell you a couple of stories that we've dealt with and how we kind of got real creative. Recently, one of our children's liver program accepted a liver in Florida. The only plane that we were able to find that day was going to be about $76,000 for the round trip. Of course, that raised a lot of concerns for our program. That is not something that they could really tolerate. And our program was very willing to allow someone to recover for them. However, there was no local surgeons available in that area to recover the liver for us. As many times we all deal with, the donor family of this young patient had requested an OR time of that evening and had pretty much made that demand. And so our options were very limited. And working with our program and trying to really think, how could we make this work? our surgeon got onto the Southwest website and called me and said, you know, I can book a want to get away fare for $297. And it just so happened we had a nonstop going here from Kansas City to Tampa, and he took it. We all knew going in that there was some risk. We all know that we never know if there's going to be flight delays when we go on vacation and so forth. But I think that that was the only way we were going to make this happen for this young recipient. Then we were able to find a charter that was in Florida to bring him home for half the price. So $28,000 ended up being that charter cost. However, because he couldn't obviously take any supplies or fluids with him, you can't check that. And we didn't send a coordinator with him in this situation because of the circumstances. I called and spoke to the OPO coordinator directly, and I really have to give kudos to my colleagues at LifeLink of Florida. They were fantastic and they understood. And, you know, like all of us are living the same sort of circumstances from time to time. They were fantastic. They picked him up at Tampa International, ensured that he had what he needed in the operating room, that they had extra supplies, extra preservation solutions for packaging and all of those things, and really supported his needs during the recovery. And I think, you know, as we're dealing with more and more of this, I think we as OPOs and as a community in general, this is something we can do better at. We need to work with each other to ensure that our teams, when they're leaving our area or coming into our area, is there anything that we can do to support those recoveries from an OPO perspective to prevent maybe fewer staff from having to travel, utilizing fewer resources, those sorts of things. And I think LifeLink of Florida really showcased that day and really helped support our patient. In addition, you know, I think working to have local recovery surgeons available to assist recoveries so that we can prevent unnecessary travel if we need to. And I know that's easier said than done. However, we've been able to make that happen, and we've been real creative at MTN. We've developed a surgical organ recovery specialist role that's credentialed to recover lungs, livers, and kidneys. We put these positions in place in 2020, largely due to the pandemic. Many of you are aware that MTN was a leading OPO for the recovery of COVID positive donors, and we simply could not have made it through that time without our recovery specialists. They're not surgeons, yet they're extremely experienced, knowledgeable, very skilled specialists who've worked in the field of organ recovery for a combined 46 years between the two of them. Many of those years, they worked alongside our transplant surgeons who recognized their talent, took the time to ensure their training, and credentialed them. And in 2020, they began doing recoveries independently. And since that time, they recovered 325 donors, in which 456 lungs, livers, and kidneys have been transplanted from the organs that they've recovered. The programs in the Midwest are getting used to them and often ask for them to do recovery. So I think thinking outside the box, we're really, really lucky to have them. But looking at, you know, how can we handle this issue of recovery surgeons and availability so that not so many people have to travel. And then lastly, I want to tell a story. Last week on the evening of Thanksgiving, we had a donor, a little 3-year-old little boy who had been sick most of his life. His family made the difficult decision to move to Comfort Care after he suffered an anoxic injury when his trach became dislodged. They wanted him to be an organ donor, but they wanted it to move quickly, as we all have those cases. And they were just done. And they gave us 6 hours. They put the recovery, put the recovery in the middle of the night. In fact, the same surgeon that flew on Southwest did this recovery as well. His kidneys were successfully recovered. They were beautiful, they were pumping, they were normal kidneys. However, we're on Thanksgiving. And during the process of allocation, it became very, very clear to us that we were not going to find flights to get these kidneys out. There were several centers across the country who were interested, but they all declined because we weren't able to get them to them within a reasonable amount of time. I think in desperation and realization that if we didn't do something to get the kidneys out of Kansas City, they weren't going to get used. And that's not the right thing to do. So we ended up chartering a flight that cost $34,000. And we knew as the OPO, we were going to have to pay for that, but it, again, was the right thing to do. I have to give kudos to the transplant center. They stepped up and offered to split the cost with us. And the kidneys were successfully transplanted on the East Coast. It worked that time. However, that's really not sustainable for all the kidneys that are at risk for non-use due to lack of flights. That was something that we did in the moment to make it happen. One thing that we have done also here in Kansas City is to help with the transportation issues is we partner with NORA and they have placed a plane here in Kansas City. It was just positioned here last month. So we're just beginning to see the benefit of that. It's used primarily for our local programs when we have a fly out. However, we've also been able to use it to move our own staff across our service area when needed. So that's a little bit about MTN and the things that we're trying to do to tackle this situation. I look forward to the continued conversation and discussing ways we can work together as an industry to come up with some creative solutions.
Great, Lori. There's a comment there in the chat from Barry Friedman, just waiting to see if there's a question that's going to pop up for you before we go to Paul. Certainly, you know, have seen, of course, for everyone who might be a little geographically challenged with the Midwest, St. Louis is on the other side of the state of Missouri from Kansas City. And certainly when your neighbor is a high performing OPO, your local transplant centers get used to having quite a bit of availability, especially around the lung program issue there as well. And I certainly think Mid-America Transplant owns a King Air medical air ambulance, and in this coming weeks, we'll acquire a second one. Primarily, they're used to move donors back to our donor care unit, but they also are used to transport recovery teams to Kansas City on a regular basis to support the high volume liver program and lung program here in St. Louis. And we've had a lot of ongoing conversations. Could you use a turboprop to get over to Kansas City? And really, surgeons prefer jets. Even when the savings is $2,000 to $3,000 a flight and the time differential is 15 to 20 minutes, they want to get to Kansas City as fast as possible. We certainly understand their concerns and their desire as well, but that puts additional pressures in the system. So kudos to you and your team for your ongoing and continued success, and congratulations on the recent opening of your donor care unit as well.
Thanks, Kevin.
Paul, we're going to kick it up to you in New England.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Thanks everybody for your time today. I wanted just to share a little bit about our experience at Mass General. Obviously, we're over in Boston, and we are a full comprehensive transplant center. Essentially, we do all solid organ transplants except for bowel. In addition to some of the logistical challenges that were brought up by our some of the other panelists today, I want to kind of share with you maybe three main challenges that we experienced at Mass General, specifically related to the costs associated with some of these logistical challenges, as well as managing the logistics itself. The first challenge was actually educating our own internal finance teams about why are we spending money on flights, almost going down to the very basics around, of course, we have to look at the transportation of the procurement teams and such, but there was fundamental questions related to why are we paying for flights for some of these procurements. And so we had to go through a whole list with our finance team, in addition to looking at the differences between direct cost versus indirect cost, fixed cost versus variable cost related to the fuel. But also we had to educate them on what are the economic costs related to the opportunity cost, which is a component of explicit cost versus the implicit cost, which is essentially the value of what is the foregone opportunity. Like essentially, if we were not to support a flight, or maybe even to refuel another jet as a backup, because one of our additional teams is already on a procurement, and we had to justify that to our financial teams. And so there was a lot of education that needed to occur. But also, in addition to that, we had to really outline the sunk cost, right? Here we are, we're spending incredible amounts of resources for our teams, for our surgeons, pre and post-transplant, inpatient care, outpatient, infusion. And now here we are stuck with the decision at the very end, do we spend $20,000 on a plane, right? Or how much does a lost opportunity for a heart transplant truly cost, right? So we had to really understand and help educate our finance team around what the true cost is related to some of these logistical challenges. And then the next challenge was really to identify who ultimately pays for these costs, right? There's a difference between who bears the initial cost versus who carries the cost and passes it through. And also, in addition to that, is who makes the decision. Is it the surgeon? Is it whoever whoever was on call, whoever they called that day, or whichever contractor or broker picked up the phone and decided, yes, we have a plane available for you. So we had to really kind of unpackage who bears the cost, as well as the who has the authority and who is the decision maker of where we actually go to for some of these airplanes that are have limited availability. And then next is, how do you budget for this? And also, how do you put guardrails around certain rates, and how do we control the costs? And actually, just most recently, over the last few months, our OPO, New England Donor Services, they just announced that they have one jet that they were going to potentially sell that jet and decommission that and get out of the whole air transportation business. And so here we were, our region one of about 14 transplant centers, kind of struggling independently about what are we all going to do. But then we actually all came together to look at, could we actually partner and collaborate around a single preferred vendor? And also we just moved forward with an RFP to look into that as well. Again, to create sort of economies of scale, but also to meet sort of the needs and demands that our vendors have requested related to making sure that there's volume to justify whichever resources and assets that they put on the ground. So those were some of our challenges specifically related to cost, and I'm looking forward to our Q&A.
Yeah, Paul, a little question there for those who might be new in the industry. When you talk about educating your finance team, I'm sure that was more than one conversation. Can you kind of give us a timeline on what that might have taken to really get them up to speed where you feel comfortable with their knowledge base today?
Yeah, great question. So it took roughly about a couple months just to get to the right people. Also, it's not a one and done type of education. There's constantly people who are coming on, constantly people who are new. We now are part of a larger Mass General Brigham, so you also have to educate others within the accounts payable system. In addition to that, when you start looking at vendors, if you will, you also have to have contracts with certain vendors. So if you have a subcontractor or you're going through multiple different lines of other air charter companies, someone in corporate office could just completely not process the invoice for payment. And so there's constantly educating our entire team of why we're actually here now, responsible for the setup as well as the payments for the organ transportation.
Thank you. And then one last question before we go to Kevin is, what's your timeline on having identified a single preferred vendor? Do you think that's achievable in Q1 or Q2 of 2023, or do you think it'll be further out?
I think it'll be Q1 2023. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're actively working on that with our Region 1 transplant centers.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. You can never have too many Kevins on a panel. And we're going to move a couple of degrees warmer to the south, but remain on the East Coast and kick it over to Kevin at Piedmont. Kevin, how are you?
Hey, thanks, Kevin, and appreciate you guys having me on today. I'm excited to talk about this topic. And yeah, it's a nice 58 degrees here in Atlanta, Georgia. So anyone interested in this nice weather, give me a call. We're always looking for folks. I wanted to just share a little bit of our experience here at Piedmont. We kind of had a conflation of issues, and they're not all that different from what has been mentioned already, but maybe some specific ones that are worth mentioning. We had a huge growth, especially in our liver and heart programs over the last couple of years, and heart in particular over the last year. We had difficulty in finding flights and aircraft and pilots and all the things that have already been mentioned. We had more flights going out of our state and our region, specifically for heart and liver due to reallocation or new allocation schemas. We also had this interesting wrinkle that hit us about at the same time, which had to do with our organ procurement organization, LifeLink of Georgia, who's a great partner. And they were running into similar staffing issues with surgical coordinators. And so whereas in previous years they had helped support us in flyouts with surgical coordinator support, they no longer were able to provide that as of this past July. And so we had to scramble a bit to try to figure out exactly how to approach that issue as well. A little bit more on that, we are a non-academic private healthcare system, and so we do not have the benefit of residents and fellows. And so when we're going out for procurement and we do all of our own liver and heart procurements, we are, the kind of the one man or one woman show with our surgeons going out, who's ever on donor call for that night. And so we had kind of a compilation of issues all coming together at one time. And so we really took 3 or 4 different approaches over the course of the last year to help address each one of those. And all of these things end up kind of working together. The first one we did is that we partnered with a transportation organization, Trinity Medical Solutions, and they are our partner for all of our ground and air transport. And given the heavy volume, both in Atlanta and with Piedmont in particular, we were able to actually have a plane that they located here for us at one of the local airports. So it's not dedicated to Piedmont, but it's kind of always in a hangar here, and we use that aircraft more so than any other, and that has proved to be extremely beneficial and successful. We also utilized Trinity for all of our coordination and organization of all things transportation. So our call coordinators who are on call 24/7, 365, receiving offers and making decisions with our surgeons on those offers, will give a phone call to Trinity, and then they will help organize our flight and ground transportation, both at the donor OR location as well as here at home. And we have a dedicated vehicle with lights and sirens as well for ground transportation to and from the airport. So that was the first thing that we did, and we have been partners with Trinity now for about a year. The second thing that we did is that due to the change with OPO surgical coordinator support, we needed to build our own internal team for surgical coordinators to help support our surgeon team and fly out with those guys. And so we hired someone from Wisconsin who came in and helped us build that team of 3 very highly trained scrub techs who worked with our liver teams for a long time here in our local OR. And they now take rotation of 24/7, 365 call and fly out with our surgeons and help support them as their surgical coordinator support, which also provides that support to the local OPO in which we're flying out to. So really a dual benefit there. The third thing we did, and more recently, is that given the increase in our heart transplant volume, I think we've done about 33 heart transplants over the last 4 months. And in previous years, I think the highest we had ever done was 12 to 15 in a given year. So, rapid growth, and we've got 2 heart transplant surgeons who are busy cardiac surgeons otherwise as well. And so we ran into some issues with procurement. And so we reached out to a vendor STARS teams and have had a relationship with them for the last couple of months in helping procure our organs and bring those hearts here to Atlanta. So that has actually helped our team tremendously. The last thing that we did, which was actually the first, but is that we partnered with our local OPO, LifeLink of Georgia, and established an organ recovery center here on site at Piedmont, Atlanta. And so for all of our donors across the state, we attempt to bring them into our organ recovery center here. We've got a team of intensivists and ICU nurses that help do donor management with those donors. We work very closely with obviously with LifeLink. It's a partnership with them, and deploy hospital resources to help support that endeavor. And that's helped us simply with local procurement. Obviously, those organs get allocated out just like any other. But when they get allocated here, that obviously helps tremendously to kind of take them upstairs, so to speak, to the OR versus having ground or air transportation. it's also given us the benefit of, you know, a liver that's been turned down and is on a late sequence and running out of time. We can go take a look at that and you know, have visualization and make a decision there with, you know, biopsy and visualization of the organ. And we've probably had, you know, 10 dropped organs that we've been able to pick up and help our patients with. So those are really the four things that over the last, I'd say 18 months or so have come to fruition that have really helped us deal with those conflation of issues that we found and that many of you are struggling with as well.
Kevin, how many staff have you added during this most recent time period during this conflation of issues? We heard earlier from Megan out at USC that their call center has grown over the last several years to 17. Do you have a rough estimate of what your team has had to do in the last 6 months or so?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of groups because I think it matters. We added for the surgical coordinator support, we added 3 individuals. We've added a couple of call coordinators. So our entire call coordinator team is 8 people. And so that's the team receiving all of our organ offers and helping sort through those. So 8 folks all working remotely 24/7 and works extremely well. And then we've added about another 10 folks through the rest of our abdominal and heart transplant programs, coordinators and other individuals who help support the team.
A quick question for you from Ronald. Do you support all organ transplants there at Piedmont?
Oh yeah, great, good question. So I should have opened with that. So Piedmont here in Atlanta does all solid organ except for lung. We are a busy liver, kidney, pancreas, heart program, and do not do lung at this point, do not do small bowel at this point. So all except for lung at this point. Great,
thank you. That concludes hearing from each of our 5 panelists. We are going to go back in, we've got some questions in the chat and we have some additional questions that we're going to put back out there. I'm going to throw this first question though back out to the 3 transplant center administrators. It's from Angie, and the question is, has anyone had any luck with reaching out to the insurance carriers about adjusting payment for these higher flight costs? You can probably see the rest of that question there in the chat. Any of the 3 transplant center administrators able to comment on that?
We have not at this time. And I do think, you know, I agree with you, Angie. It's something we need to look at as a transplant, you know, community as a whole about engaging with our insurance partners on this because, you know, I'm looking at invoices for the end of the month right now, and I've got, you know, a $45,000 one, $52,000. So they're definitely, you know, our invoices are quite high. Our transport costs, despite what we put in, have gone up.
Yes, same experience here in Atlanta. We have attempted some of that in some of our renegotiations as they have come up without success so far. Interestingly, you know, we try to show these trends as we have conversations with our third-party payers, and we have had over the last 3 years about a 20% increase in our overall flight costs. Some of that's just due to volume, right? Volume of flyouts. Some of that's due to fuel costs. Some of that's due to cost of flights and distance. But we have not had success thus far in renegotiating any of those rates.
Their experience at Mass General as well.
Okay, great. The next question we have, and we'll push this to the panel, is really it's that heart kidney question. Do the heart and the kidney, do they get to travel together, or do you send the heart first with the kidney to follow? We recognize that's an oversimplification there, but any of the 5 panelists care to comment on that question?
We always send them separate. Our heart team is normally pretty anxious to get back and get started on the recipient, and with the amount of time it takes to, you know, go through abdominal organs, package, all of that, we have the time to get the kidney to us, because by the time they finish the heart and stabilize the patient, our patients most of the time go back to the ICU for stabilization, and then the kidney is done about 12 hours later. So we always send them separately. And for heart livers, we did 5 heart livers last year. The majority, actually, we had 2 separate transports for that as well. Our heart team came back first with the heart. the liver team followed with the liver. So we had to set up transport for 2 separate teams on that.
I have to ask, Megan, any use of choppers on any of that? I mean, that's the first time we've heard choppers in the panel.
We do, depending on traffic in LA and what time we're going out, we do chopper back. And there's times where we do oftentimes chopper the organ back, but not our team as well, dependent on safety concerns. So we have made that decision as well, where there's times where just the organ goes back.
Wow.
Kevin, from an OPO perspective, we've had a mix, and it really has depended on where the center is and how close they are to us. So for example, we've sent a heart kidney to Nebraska and the heart team has just waited. It's not that much further. But then programs that are further away have asked for, you know, dual transportation. And that's a challenge in and of itself. And especially if they want it pumped. So
yeah, absolutely. We've had a similar experience here in St. Louis. All right. And then Megan, it seems like I just want to make sure we get back to Deborah's question at the top of the conversation here is you send out your own team for thoracic recovery?
We do. We use our
Yeah,
own team for thoracic, and we're probably about 50-50 with local recovery versus our own team for liver.
Okay, great. All right, the chat is still open. We're coming up at the end of our hour together. Our panelists are able to stay on a little bit longer if there are questions. I would ask the panelist, how do you make a differentiation between when you're going to fly and when you're going to drive? You know, certainly we've had conversations in St. Louis with a lot of our neighbors in the lower Mississippi River Valley, and Lori touched on it in her comments. Commercial availability for flights, especially in smaller population centers, is very challenging. Here in St. Louis, we know that if we are flying a kidney out commercially on the weekend and we're going to an OR after 12 p.m., which seems pretty early in the day, we're going to struggle to get it places. And so we've talked to our friends in Mississippi and Louisiana and Memphis and in Arkansas, and people are driving, recognize it's not thoracics, but they're driving 11, 12, 13 hours to make sure that that organ gets there, those kidneys get there, excuse me. So any comments from the group here as kind of a final question about how you make that differentiation between when you drive and when you fly on kidneys?
Kevin, I think, you know, a lot of that has to do the time of day. When is the OR? What is the availability? I know, you know, we do have planes on standby. We'll actually do hot standbys sometimes if we feel like it's necessary, where we don't actually have the plane fly, we just have it on ready. That's cheaper. And that way we can make those decisions. So hot standby is something that we will do, especially for livers, and just to kind of cut the costs, but make sure that the plane might be available. In terms of driving, a lot of it has to do with, you know, like you said, how long is it going to be? What is that distance? What time of day is it? You know, something as simple as, you know, is the driver's time going to time out? You know, a lot of the times we don't consider that, but if the OR goes late and you've got a driver that's waiting and then they have an extended drive, we got to make sure that that doesn't time out as well. So kind of looking at what those distances are, as well as what the transplant centers are willing to tolerate. A lot of the times when you have the ORs where if you don't get a kidney, for instance, because that's most likely going to be what flies on that last flight, and it has to wait until the next day, and that cold time might be too much, and you might want to consider driving, you know, that organ even to maybe a different location. We're very lucky that in LAX, their cargo hours are a lot longer, but that might not be the case when it comes to something else. So really looking at all of those factors, and even if you do make a flight, will they get that kidney out of the, you know, organ on time, versus is this a transplant center that you can get to where the drive time is going to be much more acceptable and safe, of course. And then of course there's always kidney pumps that come into play as well, and those don't fly so easily on commercial. So you might want to drive those.
Valerie, you said that much more succinctly than I could have. So thank you. Yeah, that was excellent. And I know that many of us are using trackers too, to a certain extent, especially when we're driving those kidneys, whether it's the Medigo product or the UNOS product, just to keep track of of what's going on and what that arrival time is, especially as we drive these through some pretty unpopulated areas for those of us who are in kind of flyover country as well. In really trying to make sure the logistical team at the transplant center is aware when that kidney is going to arrive is really important. Hot standby, I've not heard that. It sounds like a special at Taco Bell that they advertise during NFL games, but Megan and Valerie have both used it. So we're gonna use that again as hot standby there as well. Yeah. So a couple of last questions here. We're right there. I think this goes to Kevin at Piedmont. For centers using STAR, how much is your cost driven by transportation of the surgeon versus transportation of the organ, i.e. 2 planes?
Yeah, so we added 1 leg, right? So historically, the way that this has worked from a procurement perspective is that our teams would fly out from Atlanta, they would fly to donor destination, and then recover organ and fly back. So then we're adding 1 leg with a surgeon flying from another location. And so far, it has been from Tampa, which is one of the hubs for STAR, and then flying to donor destination, flying for starters, flying to Atlanta with the organ, dropping off, flying back to Tampa, right? So, for a little while, you end up adding a couple of legs. I think the long-term solution is to not add one of those legs for the surgeon back to Tampa, if that makes sense. But we're early on in this, and so we wanted to make sure our logistics are sound before we put in the organ on the flight without us or without the procuring surgeon. But you're right, we end up adding a leg, and we did kind of cost benefit analysis of not having our local surgeons fly out and instead be available for transplant, and it just paid off in that respect. So I don't know if I answered the question, Deborah, but if I did not, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk more.
Well, I think that's a great note to add on. Doug Franklin, your question about barriers to entry for plane vendors, I think is an interesting topic for a future Alliance critical issues conversation. Corey, I think we've got some robust things to carry forward as a group. I'd like to thank our panel this afternoon of Valerie, Megan, Lori, Paul, and Kevin for their contributions, and really for everyone who's participated today, for your passion and your commitment to stewardship and excellence in our industry and to saving as many lives as possible each and every day. So thank you for everything you're doing today, tomorrow, and in the future. And with that, Corey, I'll kick it over to you.
Excellent, Kevin, thanks so much. And yes, I echo those sentiments as well. On behalf of the Alliance, we extend our thanks to this incredible panel, as well as to you, Kevin, for moderating today's conversation. Again, remember to stay tuned to our communications for more information on our September 2023 National Critical Issues Forum in Kansas City, focused on these topics. Thank you all for taking your time out of your week to be with us today, and we look forward to seeing you on a future program. Take care, everyone.